Hey, my name is Nolan Colton. I'm 34 years old and I live in Chicago. On paper, I'm the founder of a technology company worth tens of millions. I own a penthouse that overlooks the city skyline, a bank account that never forces me to check prices on menus, and a car that turns heads when it stops at red lights. But when I go on dates, I always show up as a man who has almost nothing. I wear an old coat I bought at Goodwill. I put on sneakers with worn-out heels. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic that makes a rattling noise every time I start the engine. I tell women I work as tech support for a small company. I say I live in a rented apartment far from downtown. I say money is tight for me. All of it is a lie. I do this because of Jennifer, my ex-wife. Jennifer left me after 7 years together. Not when I was poor. Not when I was building the company out of a small garage. She left when I had already succeeded, when money started bringing parties, partners, and people who smiled at me like I was an opportunity instead of a person. She betrayed me with one of my own business partners, a man richer, flashier, better at making people feel like they were stepping into a higher class. The day the divorce was finalized, Jennifer looked at me calmly and said something I will never forget. "Nolan, you're a good man." But being good was never enough. Since that day, I stopped believing anyone could love me for who I really am. I started believing people only love safety. They love money. They love nice houses, nice cars, status, expensive dinners, and the feeling of standing next to a man who can open every door. So I began testing women. In the past 18 months, I went on 25 dates. I let my card get declined at the end of dinner. I pretended to forget my wallet. I said my car broke down. I said I couldn't afford dessert. I watched how their eyes changed, and they always changed. Some suddenly received an urgent phone call. Some told me straight up they didn't want to date a man who wasn't stable. Some laughed in my face when I said I couldn't afford another round of drinks. Each time it hurt, but it also felt like relief, because they proved what I already believed. Love always has a price. People just wear different price tags. Until I met Veronica Hernandez. The first time I saw Veronica was on a Tuesday afternoon, after my 23rd failed date. I was sitting in my old Honda Civic in front of a small diner I had never really noticed before. The neon sign outside flickered, the vinyl seats inside were cracked, and the glass door was foggy with steam. It looked like a place time had forgotten since 1987. I was about to drive away, then I saw her through the window. Veronica wore a light blue waitress uniform, her black hair tied up in a messy bun. She was pouring coffee for an old man near the door. His hands were shaking so badly that he spilled water all over the table. Most tired waitresses would have sighed or gotten annoyed. But Veronica just smiled, grabbed a rag, wiped the table clean, and leaned down to ask if he needed anything else. That smile wasn't a work smile. It was real. I didn't understand why that made me stop the car, but I walked inside. I came back the next day and the day after. By the fourth time I ordered black coffee and sat there for over 2 hours, Veronica finally walked up to my table holding a coffee pot. She looked at my half-full cup, then at me with a tired but amused expression. "You keep ordering black coffee and sitting here for 2 hours," she said. "Either you really love this diner's coffee or you're working up the courage to say something." I felt my neck heat up like I was 17 again. "Was it that obvious?" I asked. She refilled my cup even though it wasn't empty. "A little," she said. "So, what are you selling? Because fair warning, I can't afford it." I laughed, surprised at how quickly she made me drop my guard. "I'm not selling anything," I said. "I just wanted to ask if you'd like to get coffee with me sometime. Somewhere that isn't where you work. But if the answer is no, I understand. You've probably seen enough coffee for one lifetime." Veronica studied me for a long moment. There was caution in her eyes, the kind that belongs to someone who doesn't have time to make mistakes. "I work 70 hours a week between this diner and a grocery store," she said. "I also have a 15-year-old brother to take care of. I don't really have time to date." I answered without thinking. "Then just coffee, 30 minutes. You pick the time and place." She bit her lip, thinking. Finally, she said, "Thursday afternoon. The park 2 blocks from here. Bring your own coffee. I'm not working that day." I nodded. "Thursday afternoon." She turned and went back to work. I stayed sitting with my bitter coffee, telling myself this was just another test. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't sure I still wanted someone to fail it. Thursday afternoon, I arrived at the park 15 minutes early. I brought 2 cups of coffee from the gas station down the street. They were cheap, hot, and tasted like water that had been personally offended by coffee beans. But I still brought them because Veronica had said to bring my own coffee. She showed up almost 10 minutes late, slightly out of breath, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of tied up like it was at the diner. She wore jeans and an old sweater that had been neatly patched at the elbows. Veronica took the cup from my hand and sat down on the bench, keeping a polite distance between us. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "Carlos had physical therapy today and it ran longer than expected." "Carlos is your little brother?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah. He has a degenerative muscle disease. Some days are better than others." She said it like she was talking about the weather, no pity, no drama. Just a fact of her life. "That must be hard," I said quietly. Veronica shrugged and looked down at her cup. "Hard or not, you still have to live. My parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. Now I'm the only family Carlos has left." She took a sip of the coffee and immediately made a face. "God, this is terrible. Why did I suggest bringing our own coffee?" I laughed. "I thought the same thing, but I didn't want to insult your choice." Veronica looked at me, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes. "I work at a diner, and I recommended gas station coffee. I have no excuse." We sat on that bench for almost 2 hours, drinking the terrible coffee and talking. Veronica told me about Carlos, how much he loved science, especially biology and physics, how last week he managed to hold a fork by himself during dinner without her help, and she had to turn her face toward the sink so he wouldn't see her crying. I listened. Not the kind of listening I used to do on dates, the kind where I was looking for cracks to exploit. I listened because I actually wanted to know. When she asked about me, the old lies slid out of my mouth like a script I had rehearsed too many times. I told her I worked in tech support. I told her I lived in a small apartment. I told her that after my divorce, I learned people usually leave when life stops giving them what they want. Some of it was a lie, but the pain behind it was real. Veronica looked at me, her eyes softening. "Just because it's been 2 years doesn't mean it stopped hurting," she said. I stared at her, surprised by how simple and accurate that sentence was. "Yeah," I said. "I guess it hasn't." She didn't tell me to be strong. She didn't tell me to move on. She didn't turn my pain into a moral lesson. She just sat there. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel uncomfortable. When Veronica stood up to make it to her evening shift at the grocery store, I almost panicked. "Can I see you again?" I asked. She adjusted the strap of her bag and looked at me, hesitating. "Nolan, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't have money to date. I'm serious. Every dollar I make goes to Carlos's medicine, his physical therapy, or rent. I can't go out to dinners or movies or do the normal things people do. You seem like a decent guy, so I don't want to waste your time." That should have been the moment I felt satisfied. A woman with no money, no expectations, someone who couldn't possibly love me for money because she didn't even know I had any. A perfect test. But what came out of my mouth was different. "Then let's just do this," I said. "The park. Terrible coffee, talking. I'm not exactly rolling in money either." Veronica studied my face like she was searching for any sign of fake sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Let's do that again." The second date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant. I chose it on purpose. Not too expensive, but expensive enough that the bill would feel heavy to someone living paycheck to paycheck. That was the ugly part of me, the part that still wanted to test her. Veronica arrived wearing a simple blue dress that looked like it had been bought secondhand, but it suited her perfectly. She ordered the cheapest pasta on the menu, even though I told her to get whatever she wanted. When the check came, I started the familiar performance. I opened my wallet, pretended to hesitate, then patted my pockets. "Shit," I said, putting on the embarrassed voice I had practiced too many times. "I thought I brought my card, but I must have left it at home. I'm really sorry, Veronica. I'm so sorry." Veronica didn't even blink. She opened her own wallet, pulled out a few crumpled bills, tip money folded neatly in a small compartment, and handed them to the waiter. "It's okay," she said. "I can cover it." I quickly said, "I'll pay you back." She turned to me and smiled. "No rush. You can get the next one." No disappointment, no judgment, no eyes recalculating my worth. Just kindness. That night, as I drove back to my penthouse, I should have felt victorious. Veronica had passed a test that 25 women before her had failed, but instead of relief, I felt sick to my stomach, because I had let a woman who worked 70 hours a week use her tip money to pay for a lie I told. And for the first time, I wasn't sure who was really being tested anymore, her or me. I kept lying. That was the part I'm most ashamed of when I look back. I told her my car was broken down, even though my real car was sitting in a private garage downtown. Veronica never complained. She just said walking was fine because she walked everywhere to save on bus fare. We walked through glowing streets at night, ate cheap ice cream from food trucks, and sat in parks with those terrible cups of coffee. Veronica never asked for anything. She even seemed relieved that our dates didn't require her to pretend she had more money than she actually did. One evening, as we stopped under a streetlight on a quiet corner, Veronica told me about her parents. She looked out at the road, her voice slowing down. My mom used to sing while she cooked. She'd sing any song, even if she got the lyrics completely wrong. My dad would read stories to Carlos using different voices for every character. I try to do the same, but I'm terrible at it. Carlos still laughs, though, probably out of pity. I laughed softly, then felt my throat tighten. For the first time, I started telling Veronica things I hadn't told anyone. About how, after the divorce, I would sit alone in that oversized penthouse, staring at the city lights below, and feeling like I had nowhere to come home to. About how I once believed that if I earned enough money, no one could ever make me feel worthless again. But in the end, the woman who had slept beside me for 7 years still walked away. Veronica listened for a long time. Then she said, with quiet certainty, Nolan, being betrayed doesn't mean you're not worthy of love. It just means one person didn't know how to keep what they had. I looked at her and couldn't speak. Some sentences don't save a life, but they can crack a wall. Our 5th date was a free outdoor concert in the park. We sat on the grass. Veronica was so exhausted that she fell asleep on my shoulder during the 3rd song. I stayed completely still for 45 minutes, afraid to move in case I woke her. I looked down at her sleeping face, the dark circles under her eyes, the small cuts on her hands from working too much, a woman who had been carrying an entire family on her shoulders while still too young. I thought, with one phone call, I could pay for all of Carlos's medical bills. But if I did that, I would have to explain. And if I explained, every lie I had told would come crashing down. On our 6th date, Veronica brought Carlos along. I met him in front of an old bookstore. He was 15, sitting in a wheelchair, thin, but with sharp, intelligent eyes. He looked me up and down like a strict judge. Carlos turned to his sister and said, "You're actually dating this guy?" Veronica's face turned red immediately. "Carlos," she warned. He shrugged and looked back at me. "I'm just checking. You have questionable taste, sis." I laughed and held out my hand. "I'm Nolan. I'll try not to lower your sister's standards too much." Carlos shook my hand, still evaluating me. "We'll see." That day, we walked through a small street fair. Carlos talked more than I expected. He loved science and fantasy novels. He hated when people spoke to him like he was younger than he actually was. Veronica watched me the whole time I crouched down to talk to him at eye level. No pity, no exaggeration, just normal conversation. The look in her eyes at that moment made my chest ache. Because she trusted me. After the fair, we bought ice cream. Veronica insisted on paying because she had just gotten a 25-cent raise at the grocery store. 25 cents an hour, she said, half joking, half serious. I'm rich now. I smiled, but something inside me twisted painfully. 25 cents an hour was real happiness for her. Meanwhile, I could lose a few $1,000s in one night and not even remember where it went. When Carlos rolled a little farther ahead to look at the bookstore window, he turned back and shouted, "You two look disgustingly cute together." Veronica turned bright red. "Carlos!" He just shrugged, completely unrepentant, and looked at me. "You make my sister laugh." She doesn't laugh enough. So, thanks, I guess. I didn't know what to say, because that sentence hit the softest part of me. As Carlos rolled toward the window, Veronica stood beside me, lightly pulling her thin jacket tighter around herself. The night was getting cold. I took off my own jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "Nolan, I'm fine." She started to protest. "Just wear it," I said, adjusting it gently. Veronica looked at me, her expression softening. "You're not like the men I've met before." I felt my heart tighten. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm really not." She stepped closer and kissed me. Her kiss was gentle, careful, like a question. I kissed her back. And in that moment, I knew everything had gone far beyond any test. I no longer cared whether Veronica passed or failed. I just didn't want her to leave when she found out what I had done. That night, I stood in the middle of my penthouse living room, looking out at the city. All the expensive furniture, the designer pieces, the custom art on the walls. Suddenly, everything felt empty. I picked up my phone and almost called my assistant to run a background check on Veronica. One call and I could know if everything she told me was true, if Carlos really had the disease, if her parents really died in an accident, if she was taking advantage of me. My finger hovered over the screen, then I put the phone down. If I did that, I would turn Veronica into a file, a transaction, a risk assessment, and I would become exactly the kind of person I hated. The next morning I called her. When she answered, her voice sounded tired but soft. "Nolan, you're calling early. Is everything okay?" I gripped the phone, my throat dry. "Veronica, can we meet today? There's something important I need to tell you." She was quiet for a few seconds, then she asked, her voice starting to worry, "You're scaring me. What's going on?" I closed my eyes. "I need to say it in person. Please." She let out a small breath. "Okay, 2 o'clock, the usual park." "Thank you," I said. After I hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time. For the first time in months of testing other people, I was afraid of my own results. I arrived at the park at 1:30. I was wearing the same old coat, the same worn jeans, the same scuffed shoes, but this time the clothes didn't feel like a clever disguise anymore. They felt like a costume I desperately wanted to take off. Veronica arrived right at 2. She was still in her diner uniform, her hair tied up in a hurry, dark circles under her eyes from the morning shift. But when she saw me, she still smiled. That smile made me feel even worse. She sat down beside me, tilting her head slightly. "Okay," she said. "You really scared me. What's so important?" I took a deep breath. "I haven't been honest with you." Her smile faded. "What do you mean?" I forced myself to look straight at her. "I don't work in tech support. I own a technology company, a very large one. I don't live in a small apartment. I live in a penthouse downtown. My car isn't broken. And I didn't forget my wallet that night at the restaurant." Veronica sat very still. She blinked, like she hadn't fully understood yet. "I don't get it," she said quietly. "What are you saying?" I spoke slowly, each word heavy. "I'm a millionaire, Veronica. Everything I told you about my financial situation was a lie. The air between us cracked." Veronica stared at me, first confused, then disbelieving, then hurt. "Why?" she asked. I rushed the words out as if saying them faster would hurt less. "Because I wanted to know if anyone could love me for who I am. My ex-wife betrayed me with a business partner. She made me believe people only stay for money, for status, for what I can give them. So I started testing the women I dated. I pretended to be poor. I let my card get declined. I watched who stayed." Veronica repeated the words, her voice turning cold. "Testing?" I ran a hand over my face. "At first, yes, but with you, everything changed. You became real. I didn't know how to stop without losing you." Veronica stood up suddenly. Her hands were shaking. "You let me pay for dinner with my tip money." I stood with her, panicked. "Veronica?" She took a step back. "You knew I needed that money for Carlos's medicine. You heard me talk about every single dollar I made. You watched me calculate bus fare, food, physical therapy, and you still let me pay, just to see if the poor girl could pass your little test." "That's not how it was," I said. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then how was it, Nolan?" I couldn't answer right away. Veronica looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I thought you understood me," she said. "I thought you knew what it felt like to worry about money, to live like you're always standing on the edge of a cliff. But you were just playing a role. You were a tourist in my life." That sentence hit me straight in the chest. "Everything I felt was real," I said, my voice hoarse. "Every conversation, every moment I spent with you, the way I cared about Carlos, all of it was real." Veronica wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold. "Which part am I supposed to believe? The part you told me? Or the part you hid in your penthouse?" I took a step forward, but she raised her hand to stop me. "Don't." I froze. She wiped her eyes quickly like she hated crying in front of me. "I need time to think. Don't call me." "Veronica, please." She shook her head. No, you had plenty of time to tell the truth. Now it's my turn to have time to decide if I can forgive this." Then she turned and walked away. I stood in the middle of the park watching her leave the same bench where everything had started. Every instinct in me wanted to run after her, to explain, to beg, to fix it. But I didn't. Because for the first time I understood. There are some things money can't buy back. There are some wounds that can't be fixed with a rushed apology. The next 3 days, I lived like a man who had lost his direction. I called Veronica twice. She didn't answer. I sent one message. "I'm sorry. When you're ready, I'll listen." She didn't reply. I went to the diner. The manager told me she had called in sick. I drove near her apartment once, then turned around because I didn't want my guilt to become pressure on her. On the 4th day, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Mr. Colton, there's a Miss Veronica Hernandez here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal." My heart almost stopped. "Let her in." Right away. Veronica walked into my office still wearing her diner uniform. She stopped in the middle of the large room, looking at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the walnut desk, the expensive art on the walls, the entire city spread out behind me. "So this is your real life," she said quietly. "Yeah." She walked over to the window and looked down at the city. I've never been this high up before. From here, everything looks small. I didn't know what to say. Because she wasn't wrong. She turned back to me. "I was angry at you for 4 days. Really angry. Carlos said you're an asshole and you don't deserve me." "He's right," I said immediately. She nodded. "Yeah, he is." She was quiet for a moment, then continued. "But I kept thinking about one thing. You told me the truth. You didn't have to. You could have kept lying and I probably would never have known, but you chose to tell me even though you knew I might leave." My voice came out low. "I couldn't keep lying to the woman I love." Her eyes turned glassy. "You love me?" I didn't hide anymore. "Yes, and I know saying that after everything I did sounds terrible, but it's the first truth I don't want to hide anymore." Veronica looked at me, tears shining but not falling yet. "You hurt me, Nolan." "I know, I'm sorry." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "I don't care how much money you have, I never cared. What I cared about was that you didn't trust me enough to show me the real you from the beginning." I stepped closer slowly, not touching her until she allowed it. "I was scared. But that's not an excuse to turn you into a test. I was wrong. And I'm not expecting you to forgive me right away." Veronica studied me for a long time. "I don't know if I can trust you the way I did before." "I understand." She wiped her eyes. "But the stupidest part is, I still want to try. Because I love you too, not the millionaire, not the fake poor guy. Just the man who sat and listened when I talked about Carlos. The man who looked at my little brother like he was a person, not a burden. The man who made me feel like I wasn't just a tired waitress." I could barely breathe. She took a step forward. "If we try again, no more lies, no more tests, no more games." "No more," I said right away. "I promise." She looked at me seriously. "And you're going to pay me back for that dinner." I let out a short laugh, the sound cracking under the tension. "I'll pay it back with interest." She gave me a look. "Don't start showing off your money on the first day of partial forgiveness." I nodded immediately. Noted. This time, when she let me hold her, I understood it wasn't the end of the problem. It was only the beginning of fixing it. 6 months later, my life no longer looked the same. Not because the money had changed. The money was still there. The company was still there. The penthouse was still there. But for the first time in many years, those things no longer felt like a fortress I needed to hide inside. Veronica still worked at the diner, but only 40 hours a week now. She said she liked the job, liked the regular customers, liked the feeling of earning her own money. I respected that, even though part of me wanted to buy the entire diner just so she wouldn't have to stand so much. I created a separate fund for Carlos's medical expenses. At first, Veronica pushed back hard. She said she didn't want our relationship to turn into some kind of sponsorship. I had to learn how to stop using money as an apology. In the end, it was Carlos who ended the argument. He sat in his wheelchair, arms crossed, looking at both of us and said, "Veronica, if Nolan is ridiculously rich and doesn't use that money to help me feel less pain, then he's both rich and useless." Veronica glared at him. "Carlos." He turned to me and continued, But don't think having money means you win either. I still don't completely like you. I nodded seriously. I'll keep trying. Carlos looked at me and said, Good. Start by never wearing that Goodwill coat again. It makes you look like you're apologizing to the whole world. Veronica laughed so hard she had to sit down. That was the first time I saw her laugh without looking tired. Not everything was easy. There were still days when Veronica got upset if I tried to buy her something too expensive without asking. One time I ordered her a nice winter coat because her old one was too thin. She looked at the price tag and her face went cold. She put the coat down and said, Nolan, I'm not your charity project. I immediately understood I had messed up. I'm sorry, I said. I just saw that you were cold. She looked at me for a long time. Then next time, ask me. Don't decide for me with your wallet. I nodded. I will. Those conversations weren't comfortable, but they were real. And the truth, even when it hurt, was still better than the tests I used to hide behind. One Sunday evening, Veronica came to the penthouse with Carlos. We cooked a simple dinner together. I burned part of the eggs. Carlos declared I needed survival cooking lessons. Veronica stood by the sink, laughing until her face turned red. After dinner, Carlos sat out on the balcony looking at the city lights. It's really beautiful from here, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I stood beside him. Yeah, but I didn't used to think it was beautiful. Carlos glanced at me. Because you were sad in the rich people way? I laughed. Something like that. He looked at the city for a while longer, then he said, Veronica doesn't need you to save her. She hates that feeling. I nodded. I know. Carlos turned to me. But sometimes she needs to rest. Don't make her feel guilty about that. I looked at the 15-year-old boy who had to understand life too early. I'll try. Carlos shook his head. No, trying isn't enough. Do it. I smiled. Got it. I will. 1 year after the day I told her the truth, Veronica took me back to the old park. She brought 2 gas station coffees exactly like the first time. They were still terrible. She handed me one and said, Drink it. So we remember where we started. I took a sip and made a face. I think this could be used to strip paint. Veronica laughed. She sat down on the bench beside me, the same bench where she had once stood up and walked away. For a long time, we just watched children playing on the swings. Then Veronica spoke. I used to think I would never forgive you. I looked at her. She continued, not because you're rich, but because you made my real struggles feel like they were being measured. I hated that feeling. I hated myself for doing it too, I said. Veronica turned to me, but I also know you changed, not with words. By the way you learned to stop reaching for your wallet. By the way you started asking instead of deciding. By the way you let me be angry without trying to buy peace. I let out a slow breath. I'm still learning. She smiled. I know, so am I. I looked at her. The woman who had once taken tip money out of her wallet to pay for a dinner with a man pretending to be poor. The woman who had every reason to walk away when she learned the truth. The woman who still came back, not because I was instantly worthy, but because she believed people could fix their mistakes if they were honest enough. Veronica, I said, before I met you, I thought love was something you had to test. After meeting you, I finally understood that the person who truly loves doesn't need to pass anyone's test. I'm the one who has to learn how to be worthy of them. She looked at me, her eyes softening. That's a good line. Did you practice it? I smiled. A little. Veronica rested her head on my shoulder. Fine, I'll let it slide this time. We sat there for a long time. No more millionaire pretending to be poor. No more waitress being tested. No more tests. No more games. No more lies dressed up as self-protection. Just 2 people who had hurt each other, told the truth, and stayed long enough to learn how to trust again. And if anyone ever asks me where it all began, I won't talk about the penthouse, the tech company, or the money in my account. I'll tell them about an old diner, a tired waitress who still smiled at an old man who spilled water, and 2 cups of terrible gas station coffee. I'll tell them about the night I pretended to forget my wallet, and she took tip money out of her purse without making me feel small. I'll tell them that there was once a woman who had very little, but gave me the one thing all my money could never buy. A chance to be loved, not because I was rich, but because I finally stopped pretending to be poor in my own heart.